All right, let's get into it. Today, we're going to unpack a really powerful story that started in a small school in Rwanda, but ended up carrying a message for the entire world. This is the story of the apparitions in Kibeho. So, imagine hearing the news for the first time. That's how one witness described it, like the sky itself had changed color. You just get this feeling that something fundamental had shifted. An event in this remote school was about to grab the attention of a whole nation and, eventually the whole world. So where did this all kick off? Well, it all started with a single vision, a totally unexpected encounter in a very, very ordinary place. Okay, so picture this. It's a school lunchroom, just a normal day. A young student, her name's Afwansine, is serving her classmates when all of a sudden she just freezes, drops her spoon. She's looking at this woman of incredible beauty who has seemingly appeared out of nowhere and has just spoken to her, calling her my child. So, of course, Alfonsine asks the woman who she is. And the reply she gets is so simple, but wow, so profound. I'm the mother of the Word. Now, in the Christian faith, that's a direct reference to being the mother of Jesus Christ. And this identity, it would become absolutely central to every message that came after. The reaction was, as you can imagine, immediate and intense. The story just spread like wildfire. You had newspapers covering it. Everyone was talking. But right alongside all that excitement was some deep, deep skepticism. And for Alphonsine herself, she actually faced persecution from her own classmates who thought she was lying just to get attention. But that initial disbelief, it started to shift because the apparitions kept happening and they started to expand. Suddenly, this whole thing wasn't just about one girl anymore. More witnesses started coming forward. So over the next few months, 2 more schoolgirls began having their own visions. First up is Anathlee, about a month and a half after Alphonsine. And then, a couple of months after that, Marie Claire. This timeline was really key to the story gaining some serious traction. And what's so interesting is that each of these visionaries played a really distinct role. You had Alphonsine, the pioneer, the one who took all the initial heat. Then Anathlee, who was known for being quiet and very religious, she brought a lot of credibility to it. But the real turning point, according to the source, was Marie Claire. See, she had been one of Alphonsine's biggest critics, one of her main persecutors, and her complete 180-degree transformation into a believer was something the community just couldn't ignore. Okay, so now that we have our 3 visionaries, a core message really starts to emerge, and it's all centered on prayer, on suffering, and on a specific devotion that, according to the source, had been pretty much forgotten. Apparently, the visionaries were taught a very specific devotional prayer that uses beads, the Rosary of the Seven Sorrows. The apparition explained that this prayer had fallen out of use, that it had been forgotten, and she wanted it to be taught to the whole world all over again. And the reason for this prayer was made crystal clear. It wasn't just about reciting words. It was presented as this powerful tool for healing emotional and spiritual pain. It was a way to connect with suffering and actually find a path through it. Now, not everyone was convinced, not by a long shot. In fact, there was a very strict local priest who saw the growing crowds and all the excitement as just chaos. He was determined to shut the whole thing down, convinced the girls were just causing a major disturbance. So, according to the testimony, the apparition then sends a message to the priest through Marie Claire. But it wasn't a scolding for his disbelief. It was for how harshly he was treating the children. The message came with what was called a motherly punishment, a request for him to pray the entire rosary on his knees with his hands held up in the air. Publicly, the priest refused, said no way. But later that night, in total secret, he did exactly as he was asked. He closed the curtains, turned off the lights so nobody could possibly see him, and he did the whole prayer. Then he hid the rosary beads in a drawer, totally determined that no one would ever find out. 2 weeks go by, Marie Claire comes back with another message. It starts with a thank you for completing the prayer, but then it includes this stunningly specific detail, a request for him to take the rosary from under the papers in the drawer where he'd hidden it. I mean, he knew nobody could have seen him do that, and that one moment completely converted him. And once he was on board, a lot of other people were convinced. So, as more and more people started to believe, the messages, well, they took on a much darker, much more urgent tone. The focus began to shift from personal conversion to a really dire warning for the entire nation. The warnings from the apparition grew more and more desperate. The messages talked about an enemy attacking and basically pleaded with people to wake up, to pray, to change their ways. And it came with a warning. If they didn't, there would be terrible terrible consequences. And a little over a decade later, those consequences arrived. The Rwandan genocide of 1994 took the lives of up to 1 million people. The source we're looking at makes the direct claim that this unimaginable tragedy was the prophesied consequence of not listening to the warnings given in Kibeho. But inside this national tragedy, the testimony presents this really stark contrast. On the one hand, you have the immense suffering of a country that, according to the source, didn't listen. But on the other hand, there's a very specific story of protection. A chapel had been built and dedicated to the Seven Sorrows. And during the genocide, 250 nuns reportedly prayed there constantly and were left completely untouched, even though the killers knew they were there. Now, while all these events took place in Rwanda and seemed to predict a Rwandan tragedy, the source is really clear that the intended audience was actually much, much larger. So when the visionaries asked, why us? Why our small country? 2 reasons were given. First, because there were still humble hearts not attached to money. And second, it was because of a historic event back in 1946 when the Rwandan king publicly dedicated or consecrated his entire nation to Christ. And the apparition made it absolutely explicit that the message was universal. Kibeho was the location, sure, but the call to prayer, to repentance, and to conversion was meant for everyone, everywhere. So when you boil it all down, this account from Kibeho is a story about a message that was delivered, and for the most part, a message that was ignored. It presents this dramatic link between spiritual action and physical reality, and it leaves us all with a pretty heavy and profound question to think about. What really is the cost of not listening?